Okay, you can stop being stupid. Before beginning, what is your experience of Ovine Replica? Hmm. Start from the beginning. Story will start from the very beginning. Is this okay? Yes. Vividly, I remember a nightmare. Above all, I remember that you were in it. You've been in many of my nightmares. Sometimes, however, they're pleasant dreams. That is, until I wake up. Sun beamed down through the clear, blue sky above, barren soil stretching as far as the eye could see. In the still, silent air, I felt a droplet of sweat trickle down my forehead again. I found myself sweating often enough, but the dread of being baked out in this open wasteland amplified that phenomenon and sent my face flushing. The mountains towering all around the horizon and tinted in blue were too far to reach on foot. With no water in sight, I would collapse before I could ever reach them. With nowhere to go, all I could do was stand and stare ahead at everything I had no hope of attaining. I had seen this place before and found myself here countless times over, though I never came any closer to understanding how I arrived at such a desolate place. Each time I did, I was stricken with panic to learn that the situation was more than merely another dream this time. The ground mocked me, the sky mocked me, the sun mocked me, the horizon mocked me. Everything mocked me. Everything mocked my ineptitude to end up anywhere but here. Turning around in desperation to find anything salvageable behind myself, I found the only thing reachable with a few steps. Yet the hazy figure standing across from me, unreachable all the same. That person mocked me with the same stoic silence as our surroundings, with nothing of value surrounding either of us. I locked my gaze onto their eyes. They squinted like anyone else would when faced with the light from above, but I could not discern any more emotion these eyes held. Perhaps, in that case, this indistinct character wasn't unlike me. There was little of note that distinguished them from me. We each embodied a little aside from standing here in this dismal place, while here it was apt to say that no one was anyone. A burning sky above, and fertile soil far from civilization's reach. This scenery embodied my very being, of course. That was why I was here. If nothing else, I belonged here. And yet, I was not alone. Without taking the time to look around, I knew we reached our destination as the sound of galloping hooves came to a halt. We're here, Mr. Escount. I hesitated to loosen my embrace from behind until his implication became clear. I'll see you tomorrow, alright? I let go of him and took a glance to the side, seeing the brick building in front of us, with a sign above its door that said, Fortune Teller. I adjusted myself and hopped down to the ground from the back of the elk I had been riding with him, then turned back to him and waved. Yeah, tomorrow. A grin involuntarily stretched across my face as I spoke to the man sitting atop the elk. He was adorned with the same uniform I wore, though his red coat fastened together by a belt showed he cared more for formality and had more of an adherence to guidelines than I did. But his thick beard and his disheveled blonde hair tied into a ponytail made him seem approachable to me, in spite of the outfit that showcased his status in society. Although both of us had authority over the average citizen, he was still my superior. He looked back at me with a toothy grin and gave a salute. If anything happens, fault me. I'm counting on you. His tone remained as cheery and friendly as always. And tell Carol I said hi. The back of his feet kicked at the sides of the elk as he looked forward, and it trotted off while his hands controlled the reins attached to the beast. I continued to wave as I stood still and watched him ride down the brick street and turn around a corner. It always gave me somewhat of a bitter sensation at the end of each day, as much as I knew that I would see him again the next day. Leaving him behind, I turned to the building beside me and walked through the door. I was greeted by a warm, welcoming atmosphere. There was little in the coffee shop's interior that was placed where it was, with a proper sense of design in mind. So, its laid-back attitude made it my kind of place. After glancing through the small group of customers scattered across the seating, I picked an isolated table to seat myself at. Shortly afterward, I spotted the source of a familiar voice calling out to me. Hello, Ika? Noah says hi. How many people did you arrest today? None, actually. We patrolled a little, but things were pretty uneventful. It's been almost too calm lately. Today was a pretty slow day for me, too. You think things are getting too boring? Boring is far from a bad thing. I had my fair share of thrilling days with my younger sister, and I hoped I had seen the last of them. The past 2 years were rough enough for me. Carol turned around to walk to the nearby bar area and continued to talk to me from across the space between us. Well, what about my paycheck? And what about yours? Oh, come on. We have plenty of money for now. Maybe. What you need to do is venture off to those unconquered edges of the city, dealing with scoundrels, and take care of them too. Yeah. Oh, and I will. Get to it one of these. I'm just happy this part of town has gotten safer. She brought back a steaming mug of tea, which I grabbed and sipped from as soon as she set it in front of me. The strong, bitter taste refreshed me and brushed off my fatigue as always. She sat in the chair across from me and resumed speaking. You can go face new dangers and learn all about what kind of crime is going on. And I can say, welcome to Enonia. To that, I'll say nothing ever changes in this city. The change is what we're working. What's that? So, you do feel a sense of duty towards your job. Well, maybe some of Noah's patriotism rubbed off. Noah left quite an impression on you, hasn't he? I refrained from responding as she giggled. When I began my training to enter the police force, Noah was the one elite soldier who voluntarily applied to be my mentor. I suppose he felt an obligation to make sure I was fine in the absence of my father, his old co-worker. Though he disciplined and prepared me for the job, he didn't raise me as much. I looked after myself and Carol. It was just like things were after our father died, but with a little extra guidance and income. Got nothing to say? Give me a break, I'm thinking. I bet Noah does all the talking for you too, huh? You're just spoiled by him. As if I didn't spoil you. Maybe you did, you worrywart. At least you didn't stick around to show me how to brew tea and wait tables. You do a good job. Her teasing mockery dissipated, and her face beamed. I knew her to wisecrack and maintain an upbeat demeanor, even when the two of us weren't half as well off as now. But it wasn't until recently that I could see her genuine happiness. And you do a good job taking care of the city. I guess, but I still have to fix something outside the neighborhood too, don't I? Whatever you do, just stay safe. And stop by the fortune teller if you're ever in the neighborhood. Be sure to invite all your moth buddies too. I had a few distant acquaintances, but Noah was the only member of the Master Order trained higher who I felt close to. Perhaps the other soldiers were fine people, but he was the one I can always count. It was a shame he couldn't be here at the moment. I'll be sure. A moment of silence passed as I finished off what remained of my tea and set the empty mug on the table. You want another cup? Is your shift almost up? I say we go home. Carol and I walked back to our house, not too far from the fortune teller, making small talk all the while. We didn't have much concern for tomorrow, knowing it would be a good day. It's been a while since we had to devise a strategy for how to survive a day. Boring was far from a bad thing. I lay in my bed in peace and comfort, hoping to fall asleep soon. Even so, thoughts crept into my mind. I would see Noah again tomorrow. I was glad to see him in the morning each time, though I was never quite prepared to greet him. However, I was never prepared to leave him at the end of the day either. Far from the discomforting thought, yet I couldn't shake some uncertainties that lingered within me. What did he think when he went to sleep? Before I was aware of it, I opened my eyes to morning. As much as I wanted to sleep in for once, I wasn't sure how well Noah would tolerate me being unprepared, and I never wanted to get on his bad side. That if he had a bad side, I never wanted to find out. I forced myself up, hopped out of my bed, assembled my belongings, and left my bedroom. You're up. At a good time, I made breakfast. Is it later than I thought? I got up a little earlier this morning. Her job as a barista and cook helped me out more than I realized. I insisted she take on a simple job while I do the dirty work of enforcing the law, so I guess she found her own ways to reward me in turn for keeping our little family safe. After I took the dish and mug she offered to me, I sat down at one of the couches on either side of a table at the center of the room. The meal was a basic fried egg on toast and my staple of tea. I took my time appreciating the taste of everything as she nibbled on her own meal and made idle chatter. You and Noah don't have any plans for today? That's right. I grinned at the thought. You're so lazy. Come on. The mob are always harping on about how enlisting means doing something for the good of society. And you want to keep up the easy life? Maybe something will go wrong and not every day can be full of action. You'll be the one to fix it, huh? Not like I'm incompetent. You'd have more faith in your older brother. Well, I'm going to serve every single table at the fortune teller and rake in a huge tip. Your bravery is admirable. We finished our meager yet satisfactory meals, and I continued to linger on what remained of my tea while she sipped on her cup of coffee. Noah is going to drop by today. Before we go, we can all walk to the fortune teller first, if you want. I guess protecting innocent bystanders from harm is a good start to your workday. There was a knock at the front door. That knock made my heart flutter. While Carol went away to gather her belongings, I stood up and went straight for the door to open it. Red filled my vision as Noah towered over me in the doorway and in uniform. Without further warning, he widened his arms and caught me in a rough embrace. Good morning, Mr. Escal. It was rigid and cramped, yet part of me found it to be comforting. How are you? I struggled to speak, but let out whatever word I could. I'm fine. Glad to hear it. He tightened his grip and shook me around. Glad you're already suited up for the day, too. A hard-working man is what I like to see. This was a routine. It was obvious he took a liking to me, but I wondered if he ever considered that. It may have irritated me. That may have very well been all the more reason for him to keep. He let go. I reeled back and tried to regain my composure. Has Carol left for work yet? I'm right here. He rushed up from behind me. Account said you two are going to escort me to work today. I don't see why not. You shouldn't need to be escorted these days, but I suppose there's no harm in going for a stroll. Noah's dedication to his job never faltered. He knew how to avoid stress. Let's get going. Together, the three of us walked side by side down the city roads and Suka, while Carol and Noah continued to chatter. Talked about idle nonsense as Noah responded enthusiastically or appreciatively, even whenever he didn't have the proper reply. She had a different attitude around Noah than she did when her and I were alone together. Maybe because she knew he wasn't a slacker. Being the daughter of Noah's former colleague, he cared as much about her as he did about me. It made me wonder what kind of relationship he had with my father. So, the moth does have some interesting stuff going on, but I can't tell you about all of it right now. Not while I'm working? While you're doing your job, Account and I need to do our own. Of course, Account's a hard worker. She tossed me a smug grin as she stood in front of the door to the coffee. He's a wonderful young man who works hard so his family can live in peace. He slapped a hand on my shoulder and held a firm grip. I couldn't remember how often Noah went out of his way to give such a strong compliment, more than simply being nice to me. I'll take it. I tried to maintain stoicism, though a smile escaped me. Stop by here again once you're done. Account, I might work late tonight, so I'll definitely be around. And don't slack off. See you later, boys. She turned around and went through the door. It was relieving to be alone with Noah again. He lifted his hand from my shoulder and turned to face me, giving me a gentle gaze. Yes, sir, and you and Carol are definitely your father's children. Don't take her comments too personally. You're both tough kids. I don't know if you've heard, but a few of the higher ups are coming up with plans to get more of a hold on the less organized district. Although I hope you won't have to be too tough again for their sake. We began strolling side by side through the streets as we continued talking. But it was for my own sake. And now you've made a good life for yourself, haven't you? Maybe you should focus on what happens in this neighborhood, since you were able to turn it into a safer place. Noah was never exceedingly strict, but this show of concern was surprising. My superior of all people, going as far as to give me leeway, was unexpected. After my sister berated me for becoming a slut. Surely I wasn't becoming that attached to my job, was I honestly concerned about the so-called justice? As long as I managed to get by? All the work ethic he instilled. And now he wanted me to step down? I want to help you, Noah. Some all too affectionate words escaped my. I understand, but don't worry about disappointing me, right? You've already made me proud. I have no doubt your dad would be proud of you too. I didn't know he had so much sacrifice. I was aware he was a tender soul, but it came as a shock to see I may have underestimated just how tender he could be. These words I liked to hear from him. Some delinquent citizens have tried to incite riots, but I won't let them stop me, even though you've been helpful to me. Riots? What do you mean by that? I hear from other members that there have been a few civilians they've had trouble with lately. A lot of it's been simple thievery, but there have been some cases a little more violent. How violent? Has anyone been hurt? I don't know about the average involved, but I know the moth has been a target for quite a few incidents. So he was going out of his way to protect me. I doubted this story to be lie, given how much I trusted Noah, and given how much interest he showed for my well-being now. But it couldn't have been too severe, could it? Criminals would always be there, and I would have to deal with them at some point or another. No one's died, at least as far as reports say, except things were a little strange a few days ago. Did you ever notice? I guess not. What happened? You don't know. Well, the moth already dealt with that situation, so that's not a problem anymore. My curiosity rose, but if Noah said the problem was fixed and didn't elaborate, I assumed he wanted to ease my worry and move on, so I let it slide. You might encounter a few troublesome people yourself while you're around here, but I know now that you can deal with them if it comes down to it. But I don't want you to toss away what you've worked so hard to attain. Just keep securing the safety of that district. On our walk, we eventually arrived at one of the many bases of operation for the moth, a tall building identified by flyers on its wall, and flags carrying the insignia of the organization. Are we doing more than just patrolling again? He replied in a hushed tone. Of course, we're doing that, but we still need a ride. I had almost forgotten about our mount. Noah entered the building, and before long he came from around the corner, riding atop the same elk from last night. Zebedee made for one of the most common forms of transportation in the city. Though the animals weren't always easy to manage, however, Noah's elk was a tame creature. He had a personality that could soothe the wildest of. The elk trotted up beside me, and Noah reached his hand down to me. I took his hand and seated myself behind him, atop the elk's back. With a kick to the sides, the elk went on through the street. I placed a hand on each of Noah's sides as I observed the buildings and people of the town passing us by. These slow speeds didn't warrant me hanging on too. I always refrained from getting too attached to him for the earlier parts of the day, though he never showed restraint to greet me as warmly as he did this morning. As the topic of our recent chat weighed on my mind, I didn't even bother asking where we were going. We remained quiet, riding for several blocks until I was the one to break the silence. Noah, what about you? I don't want you to get hurt either. Hey, I said not to worry about me. Besides, I'm not even getting into anything too dangerous. Hey, I said not to worry. Besides, I'm not even getting anything. Hey, I said not to worry about it. Besides, I'm not even getting into anything too adventurous. That only made me further question earlier assumption about my life. But if you want, we can catch lunch and go on our own adventure together. An adventure? Yeah, just the two of us. No crime stopping unless we happen to stumble upon some crime. We rode together on Elkback through a district dangerously close to the edge of the city. Of course, not to enforce the law, but only to pass by and look around. Given Noah's knowledge of the city, he may have chosen to take a route that wasn't even dangerous despite its location. Either way, being on a mount would have given us an advantage over any hypothetical attacker, and regardless, I felt safer in his presence. What he planned for us to see wasn't the ravaged or unsightly buildings and frightening faces on the route we passed through, but what lay in wait at the end. But it still consisted of everything we just rode through and everything we walked through earlier that morning. In front of us, a vast area of the city lay stretched out, beyond the isolated hill we sat on. Behind us was a forest I couldn't see. The other side of, we were at the rift between civilization and nature. See? Isn't this nice? I don't know if I ever had the opportunity to take you to this spot of mine. Work distracted me too much for the past few years. It is nice. I couldn't find what to say, but I was impressed and wondered if my minimal words were able to convey that impression. This was the kingdom I worked to protect. Without a word more, I took in the sight for a moment before Noah broke the silence. I want to make sure you have the time to feel the leisure in something like this. I know the last 2 years were rough for you. 2 years. 2 years since you started your training, and just a year ago when you became a part of the mob for real. That's right. You were real determined to get this job right at the special minimum age requirement of 18, weren't you? I was really determined to get out of poverty. I chuckled at my comment, and Noah let out a hearty laugh. You're an awful young soldier. At least you're younger than your dad was before he joined the police. But come to think of it, not too much younger than when I signed up. You're at a good age. I hate for you to waste it all on overworking yourself when you got to be 31. You're at a good age. I hate for you to waste it all on overworking yourself when you get to be 31. You'll look back and be glad you found the time to take it easy. But I'm not sure if the police will have to reform again while you're in it. I wouldn't think so. Reform? It was a long time ago, so I don't know if you remember when your father was in the force. It didn't go by the name it holds now. Around after he died was when it was restructured to work more efficiently against recent crime at the time, and so it became officially known as the Master Order Trained Hire. He was killed in a rebel assault. With that fact in mind, it began to make sense to me why Noah became protective of me. His face lost its warmth charm as his usual smile faded. I spoke up and resumed the topic at hand, unable to bear seeing him unnerved. Oh, that's right. I remembered some of that, but not all of the little facts. My small show of interest appeared to be enough for him as he turned back to me and smiled yet again. And it's a good organization. Thanks to your help, you've done a great job contributing to your little community in this big picture. Perhaps I was not only able to continue my father's work, but finish it as well. Noah motioned his hand towards the cityscape before us. For the good of society, and all that nonsense. I continued to gaze upon the city in silence, taking in what he said. I felt encouraged and empowered, which was a strange note to end the conversation on, since he still insisted to be very good to him. So in my humble opinion, you at least deserve a little break. He may have been right to some degree, and like all his advice beforehand, It may have been for the best that I listened to his. Well, what are we going to do now? Or for the rest of the day? Whatever you want, Mr. Escount. I was dropped off in front of the fortune teller yet again. It was the end of another successful day with Noah. For all the same reasons as yesterday, now for so many more. He was good to me time and time again, and that goodness was almost beginning to turn into me being spoiled by him. Not that I could complain. I wasn't sure yet if I would accept his offer for simpler work in this neighborhood, or if I would insist to follow him to the edge of the city to assist him down the line. But it was important that I enjoyed my time with him regardless. For now, I had my sister go back to. Perhaps I'll tell her an elaborate fib about what a treacherous, thrilling day I had. I entered the facility. It was a small crowd like last night, so there was no doubt she would have been easy to spot. But I didn't see her when I walked in, and didn't see her when I sat down. Didn't hear her voice coming from anywhere either. Perhaps she was busy cooking something in the kitchen? A waitress walked up to me and spoke. Can I get you something to drink? Black tea, hot. She walked off to prepare the drink. I let her aside and glanced around. Maybe not only was she serious about her claim to serve every customer, but she also vowed to cook every meal and wash every dish for the sake of outdoing my effort. That would be a waste. But if that were the case, I would definitely have to come up with a grand story to tell. The waitress came back to my table with a steaming mug in hand and set it in front of me. Do you know what you want to eat? I flipped through and glanced at the menu before me, pointed to an item, and gave my order to the waitress, to which she went back to the kitchen. Perhaps Carol was going to cook my meal, then realized who it was, or as she brought it out. The waitress who just took my order exited the kitchen almost right after she entered, so that might as well have been the case. Maybe this very scenario was an elaborate story I myself was creating. Oh, wherever Carol was, she was bound to show up at some point. She couldn't have gone far, since she claimed she would be around later. No one let me go early and ran off to do whatever work he does when I'm not around, so I had the chance to eat dinner here this time. It was a shame he couldn't be here this time either. Lunch was fine, but I wanted to eat dinner with him again one of these days. I should have told him that and invited him to stay for a while. But I suppose if he's busy, he's busy. It wouldn't be unbelievable for him to have to catch up with lost work after today. My mind became enveloped by thoughts about him as time passed, and before I knew it, the food I ordered was ready. The same waitress as before entered and exited the kitchen to bring the dish to me. I wasn't sure what Carol planned to do for dinner, or if she had already eaten, and I couldn't always be the patient type, so I reached for the silverware next to the plate and began digging at the pasta. She stood me up anyway. It wasn't my fault if she happened to get offended by me going ahead and eating without her. As I first bit into my meal, I found it delicious. As I dug deeper in, the taste was the last thing occupying my mind. Seriously, where was Carol? I went from idly gazing into one corner of the room to frequently glancing all around the restaurant to see if she could be sighted anywhere. This lasted until I finally finished my meal. Now she had to show up. He didn't show up. With my impatience at its peak, my food gone, my mood drained, I stood up, walked to the waitress standing behind the counter, and spoke to her. Hey, do you know where Carol is? Oh, her? She told me she'd be working a late shift tonight, so I've been waiting on her, but I don't see her anywhere. Some police offers came by earlier today, asked if they could talk to her outside, but she never came back in. I looked around outside and didn't see her anywhere. It's getting the rest of us worried. Could she have gone home right after that? I doubt it. She would return without informing any of her co-workers first, since she was dedicated to her work as she was. Maybe the mom had something important to ask of her. But what? She'll sometimes talk to me about how busy work was, but she never told me she saw anything that exciting aside from an occasional odd customer. If she wasn't hiding anything from me, why single out my sister of all the people in the city when plenty of others might know something more? Is it because of me? Just come to me at that point, unless they were looking for me all along. And this happened earlier. I'm not sure. The moth could have a reason to question her for so long. I bet she went home. They probably took her to a station to ask her whatever they needed to, then she left from there. Was the fortune teller on the path from the closest station to our house? I attempted to draw a mental map of the district. As I struggled to guess why she wouldn't make a stop here before going home, perhaps she simply had to be elsewhere, at another station, to fit whatever the needs of the moth were at the time. In an attempt to picture more reassuring scenarios, I realized the possibility was anything but. She or I will tell you about it next time we're around. I need my check now, please. I had no option other than to go home and find out for myself. After a jog from the fortune teller, our block of the housing appeared before me. Unable to calm myself, I opened the door as soon as I reached the door to our house, hoping to find her inside. The interior was pitch black, save from what little light from the street lamps outside leaked in from the front door and windows. Carol? No response or sound resounded. I inched my way inside, flipping light switches on and adjusting lamps as I delved further and illuminated the area. I could neither see nor hear her nearby. Hey, Carol! My heart raced. I continued to switch on lights as I checked other rooms, then made my way up the stairs and maintained the approach of brightening the house as much as I could to find a hint of her form while calling her name. Carol, are you here? Finally, I checked her room and checked my room. She was nowhere to be found in the house. This couldn't be. She vanished without a trace. This wasn't an innocuous mishap on the mouse. She was abducted. She wouldn't return if I waited for her. My only remaining choice was to investigate the closest station. I stormed out of the house and I ran through the streets as fast as my feet could carry me. Out of breath, I leaned over and clutched my knees, aware I had finally reached my destination. I had to take a moment to avoid collapse, but I couldn't waste any time. I marched up to the door of the moth station and swung it open, stepping inside. The interior held a drab, sterile atmosphere, one would expect for a government-run building, but it was lacking much government at the moment, perhaps simply because it was late at night. I had been around a place like this around this time of night before, though I had to admit it was awfully convenient that my schedule let me make it home just in time for dinner for the past several weeks. The only other person present here was an officer identified by the signature red coat of the moth, and a matching cap covering his eyes, slumped back in a leather office with his feet propped atop the desk in front of him. At his feet were a few empty and half-empty bottles of alcohol. Okay, so someone's drinking. Oh, that's nice. He let out a sudden, faint but audible breath and tilted his head towards me, then gave off a confused grunt. I wasted no time to march up to the desk, slam my hands on it, and question him. Where is Carol Canovas? It had been a while since I had a need to raise my voice. He struggled to respond and spoke in a sleepy tone. Oh, are you with the crew? Yes. If there was a time to take advantage of anyone, it was now. The new batch is, at the headquarters. Just take the tunnel if you need them. Headquarters. All the way over at this? I thought as much. That didn't sound right until having to ask further. No tunnel. Downstairs. Keys are here. His voice grew more muffled as he ended his speech with a yawn, then tilted his head away as he fell still and began a grating, hissing snore. This was the most peculiar response anyone could have to my sister's name. Nonetheless, peculiar responses came with the territory being intoxicated. For all I knew, headquarters, or even tunnel, weren't the words he meant to say. Countless questions shrouded my mind. All I knew was that this wasn't good. For now, I should have been thankful that this person was the only one I had to deal with in order to discover the truth of matters. The moth needed some slackers after all. I glanced at the set of keys on the desk and grabbed them, stomping further into the building to look for the supposed tunnel that would take me to the supposed headquarters of the moth. I found myself in a grimy, bleak tunnel, illuminated only by a series of dim yellow lights across the dark walls. I walked onward with caution, though each step of mine echoed throughout the space, which would have made it known to anyone nearby that I was here. But no one could have known of my presence. Everywhere in the recesses of that police station was entirely devoid of light. That begged the question of what sort of facility this place had morphed into. The further I went, I had never seen somewhere like this before. While having nothing in it aside from the lights adorning the walls, it appeared filthy and unattended. The space was so vast that it begged to be neglected. After I entered and took a few turns, everything evened out to a road that beckoned me to walk only on. There were no doors on either of the walls that stretched across the path before, so the only way to find an exit was to keep on forward. The tunnel was almost too perfect, yet too simple in its structure. For how long would this go on, and if I were to find the end, what would await me? If the officer at the front desk gave a reply implying something could still be done with the batch that Carol was a part of, he had to be alive. Asking myself what those words could have pertained to, I failed to produce a positive answer and concluded that whatever happened to her was inhumane. She had to have been adopted, despite having done nothing wrong, and there might have been other innocent citizens with her as far as I was aware. Or was this all a misunderstanding on the moth's part? I began to wonder if I should have tracked down Noah and asked what he thought about the situation. But if Carol was in danger, I couldn't waste any more time. I had to solve this problem on my own. Maybe at the end of this, if Noah was aware of what was happening, and he was on my side, I had another chance to make him proud. But this wasn't about me. My echoing footsteps ceased as a lone, rusted door came into view. Before me at the end of the tunnel, lit by a lone light overhead. I had wasted too much time in the tunnel behind me than any more thinking about what was beyond the door. What lay inside was nothing surprising. It was far from state-of-the-art decor, but far from being on the level of the tunnel I just walked through. It's simply because the lighting was stronger. My concern was less on the layout of the area and more on catching a glimpse of Carol. I could see a greater variance to my surroundings than in the tunnel, but after my only option was to dwell on my thoughts there, the dawn of the answer, not being laid bare now, brought me disheartenment. Seeing no one else around, I continued my steady walk through the facility, now with less reverberation in my footsteps. Wherever I walked, no one was there, both a relief and a worry. If anything else bad happened to Carol, it was either too early or It wasn't long before I discovered a section of the prison cell. I had been to plenty of prisons in the city, but this was new to me. It lacked the sterile atmosphere of the others. Everything about it, from the chipped paint on its walls to the rusted cell, came off as discomforting, like the last thing I would dare brush a hand against. Was this a place for securing criminals? Even more dangerous than the common thugs that Noah and I had handled? I couldn't think of a reason to have cages in such an isolated location. I walked along the rows that separated me and those locked inside my metal bars. These were the first people I found throughout the facility. None of them seemed to be injured, but there was a hope for Carol to be among them. As I passed by and examined each cell, every other prisoner turned to look at me, all eyeing me with the air of scorn. If I did nothing wrong and were suddenly captured, I would be angry at my captors too. But don't look at me like that. I may have the uniform, but I wasn't the guy who did anything to you. Who was the one who instigated this? Were any of these people innocent? Carol had to be, so there was no telling how many of these people were as well. My question at hand were then halted by an even more perplexing. The next cell I gave a glance to was neither empty nor occupied by a person. Two ravens within the small room began fluttering their wings, flying about in circles, talking as they passed by. There couldn't have been a logical explanation for this unless a soldier decided to lock someone's pet up alone. Maybe the moth went stupid for a day. I took my eyes off the cell and turned around to see in the cell across from it. A rabbit? I had no more reactions and was exhausted of questions. Where the hell was Carol? Ah! My heart rate fought to calm down, even as relief filled my being. A familiar voice filled my ears. Account? Whatever happened to her, I finally found her. She was knelt over behind the bars of the cell before me. She stood and clung to the bars with both hands, attempting to shake them. No avail, tossing her body back and forth. I didn't know if you would come. Where the hell have you been? I was at work. She stuttered, her voice trembling the moment she spoke. Then a few soldiers said they wanted to ask me some things and told me to go outside, but they took me away. I asked what they wanted from me, and they never told me. Just said it was official business. She shivered as her voice cracked. Even on the verge of tears, she did what she could to be understood. I couldn't remember the last time I saw this side of Carol. I didn't deserve this. I'm going to get you out of here. I have the keys. Account? While her tone remained unstable, it shifted from sadness to almost an assertion of doubt at my claim. What is it? Everything will be fine now. They won't touch you again. I took out the keys and successfully unlocked the door to her cell. A squeak resounded as I opened it. She walked outside to enter the same hall I stood in. Not just me, you have to free him too. The boy in the cell next to me. Huh? This boy wouldn't then suggest I free every other person too, would he? I stepped back to take a look at the cell adjacent to the one she just exited. Having never seen this boy because of the wall that divided their cells, could she have had the same reaction I did? The first thing that filled my eyes was vibrant pale pink, shade of the boy's thick, fluffy hair. It was a bold-fashioned choice to dye one's hair, but it wasn't an uncommon practice. On the other hand, his clothes was far from extraordinary. However, there can't be something more to him than that brief first impression. From that colorful head of hair, I noticed there were two short, stubby, curved and pointed, springing from the top of his forehead. The shade of his hair combined with the horns gave off the impression of being like an Aeolian sheep, with pink wool making them as sought after breed. I had seen that exotic livestock in the city from time to time. This had to be part of a weird costume. The boy straightened his posture and lifted his head to face me and Carol. Ah! Deep red met my eyes as he stared at me. As dark as his eyes were, they were vibrant and beaming. It was a soothing, not often seen in such a fiery color. Contact lenses too? That just sounded painful, as if getting thrown in jail wasn't enough punishment. That couldn't have been their doing too, could it? I wouldn't be surprised at this point. The moth was stupid after all. Absolutely stupid. After taking a second to assess the I tossed aside any assumptions about his visage and asked Carol, "You want me to free this kid? Could you do that for me? After keeping me company and keeping me a little sane, it would be cruel of me to leave you behind." Thus bias was already in effect. What would we do with him? Take him home? Let him spend the night? I don't see what other option he has. You really do that? I appreciate that an awful lot. Listen to him, Account. I knew nothing about this person other than what little Carol informed me of. Though having known him for such a short time, he was likely as much of a stranger to her as he was to me. I took a moment to make a decision. How can you be sure of him if you insist? I listened to my sister's pleas and tried to take a moment to understand why she would ask this. Given how long the two must have been stuck here, I had to have thought this through. Yeah, and the boy stared me down, awaiting my response. I couldn't disappoint her. I took in a deep breath, preparing to state a big decision. Okay. Yeah, really? I approached the door to his cell and used the keys on hand to unlock it. I'm aware you probably don't have anywhere else you can go. I want you to stay on your best behavior. I opened the door and let the boy exit the cell. I won't make a fuss as long as I'm not stuck in jail anymore. His face beamed of genuine happiness. It almost warmed my heart to see. I helped another citizen of Anonia, yet again as strange as this person might have been. Account, this is Otis. He told me he's been imprisoned here for a long time. So this is your brother, howdy. Their mood seemed to pick up so suddenly upon their release. It was like they had never been held captive in the first place. Carol said you'd probably be the only person who'll come for us. You did, she offered to have me come with her. And you came. Thank you so much. The eccentric character was trapped here for longer than Carol? Don't mention it. Uh-huh. But I'm still surprised to see. I cut her short to assert my priorities. You can tell me all about it once we've escaped this hole. Wait, pink hair, horns, red eyes, and those? Was nothing, never mind. I turned around and started marching back once I came. Come on, we have to get back home. And we had to stay subtle. We eventually found our way back to our house and situated ourselves in the living room. I sat alone on a couch while Otis took the one on the other side of the coffee table, and Carol cooked in the kitchen area. Are you sure you don't want anything, Otis? I already had some food earlier. Talk about luxuries. But I bet any food they have given would have sucked anyway. There were still no soldiers on our way out of the mob facility, aside from the one officer sleeping at the front desk. And very few people walked the streets of the neighborhood till late at night, so we got by without much hassle. Even so, I had to keep an eye to be certain that none of us were spotted by anyone who may have posed a threat. While Karen and Otis may have been comfortable somewhere more hospitable, I couldn't shake off the unease from earlier. Rather than being thankful for my sister's safety, I couldn't stop thinking about what the consequences of my action, or why the mob would do what they did. And furthermore, I couldn't believe we let this stranger over. Carol took a seat beside Otis with a dish in hand and began to scarf it down right away. So, tell me, what's with the get-up? It may have been insensitive of me, but I wanted to know why he was adorned in such extravagant features while captive. Get up? I had these clothes for a while. That's not what I meant. He instantly tilted his head in response to me. Wait again. There was something I noticed right after I freed him that I noticed again now. Were those also the ears of a sheep on the side of his head? I swore they moved. Account, are you talking about... Pardon me, Otis, but... Carol reached out a hand to one of the sheep ears, and it flicked back and forth upon her attempt at a touch, fluttering like the wings of a butterfly as if lightly slapping her hand away. He let out a quiet... I'm sorry if I'm too intrusive, but would you mind if I took a closer look? You can go ahead if you want. His hushed voice made it seem like he was embarrassed. Carol put both her hands on each ear and felt around. Oh my god, they're real. I leaned closer in my seat to observe the scene. I was mistaken to pass his guys off as a costume or fashion statement. Of all the things that I couldn't believe happened tonight, this was the event I had the least faith in. The air was quiet until Carol spoke up. Otis, where do you come from? I've always lived in this city. I found that doubtful. If someone here saw someone like him, it wouldn't be unlikely for the government to take him in for whatever experimentation that the mob was capable of. Maybe there really was a conspiracy going on, but why was I the one who was out of the loop? Always? He nodded. And for how long have you been cooped up by the moth? Longer than you, but it was still just a few days. Things are fine now that I'm free. Oh yeah, thanks again for letting me stay here. Don't mention it. It seemed he wasn't fully aware of the fact that he was an anomaly. Carol's fascination died down enough to finally take her hands away from Otis. I apologize, I just never seen a person like you. Don't worry, I'm aware of the fact that I'm a little bit of an anomaly. I guess if I hadn't been captured, you wouldn't have gotten a chance to meet you. Carol let out a long sigh. Today was too much for me. I need to get some sleep. We'll talk more tomorrow. Account, be sure the doors are locked. And tomorrow you better ask Noah what's going on. It seemed her surprise, for Otis' character already ran as dry as mine did. And she fell into acceptance. But as much as I acknowledged the stress of tonight, I couldn't get my mind off Otis' unusual features and mysterious character. If he was real, there had to be something even deeper and darker to the moth than their abductions of Carol. She turned to face Otis. You can sleep in the Count's bed. Even now she does this to me. I presume she would take him, since she took such a liking to him. Would that be fine? Not a problem. She let out a faint smile, yawned and walked to the stairs, making her way to her bedroom. It pleased me to see her leave my sight in peace. Now only Otis sat across from me, despite my minor grievance at the sudden accommodations. I needed to offer for this stranger. There was still something suitable about him as I found myself staring into his wide eyes. Maybe I did the right thing, and maybe Carol had the right idea. But I couldn't shake my mind off wherever he had to have come from in order to look like that. What are you looking at? Sorry, you must be tired too. If you want, I'll show you where my room is. I managed to make it to my bed at the end of a long night. Even so, I was unable to fall asleep easily. The young man we took into our care, for the time being, was fast asleep next to me. I assumed the bed was more comfortable than one of the couches, so he probably fell asleep easier than he would have otherwise. That prison must not have been very comfortable to him. I could only wonder what kind of hell he may have gone through before this. He was still strange to me, or perhaps I was simply tired. Was Otis the monster? Or was I so sheltered that anyone would laugh at the shock I felt at the sight of him? One way or another, he was real, and before my eyes, but there was no more denial I could hold. And what would I be able to do about the moth pestering him, Carol, and me? It didn't matter as long as I got a chance to talk to Noah tomorrow. Maybe he could tell me what was wrong. Part of me hoped Noah would suffocate me in his arms again. That would take the breath of me and get my mind off things. Even more so, I hoped he had no involvement with what happened tonight. I wanted to make him proud.